The bullet that grazed Josephine Parker's shoulder in the summer of 1878 wasn't what convinced her that men were worthless, but it certainly sealed her conviction like wax on a damning letter. She pressed her hand against the wound as she stumbled into Wheatland, Wyoming, her dress torn and bloodied, her faith in humanity reduced to ash and scattered on the prairie wind. The man who had promised to marry her, who had sworn on his mother's grave that he would protect her, had been the one to pull the trigger when she discovered he already had a wife in Cheyenne. The town sprawled before her in the late afternoon heat, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the dust and sunlight. Josephine was 22 years old, and she had decided in that moment, with blood seeping between her fingers and her heart hammering against her ribs, that she would never again place her trust in any man who walked this earth. She made it to the doctor's office before her legs gave out. When she woke, bandaged and feverish, a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair was sitting beside her bed. "You are safe now," the woman said. "I am Margaret Sutton. My husband and I run the general store here in Wheatland. The doctor says you will recover, though you lost a fair amount of blood." Josephine turned her face to the wall. "Thank you. Who did this to you? A man I was foolish enough to believe." Margaret was quiet for a moment, then reached out and squeezed Josephine's hand. "You are not the first woman to come through here with that story, and I fear you will not be the last. But Wheatland is a decent town, as decent as any in Wyoming territory can be. You can make a life here if you choose to stay." Josephine had nowhere else to go. Her parents were dead, killed by fever when she was 17. She had no siblings, no family waiting anywhere. The man who had shot her, Gerald Morrison, had taken what little money she had managed to save. Staying in Wheatland seemed as good a fate as any other. Within 2 weeks, Josephine was well enough to work. Margaret offered her a position at the general store, and Josephine accepted gratefully. She kept her head down and her words few. When men came into the store, she served them with cold efficiency, never meeting their eyes for longer than necessary, never allowing conversation to drift beyond the transactional. She heard them whisper about her, about the strange young woman with the haunted eyes who flinched whenever someone moved too quickly. She did not care what they thought. It was on a Tuesday morning in September when Austin Zimmerman first walked into the general store. Josephine was restocking shelves, her back to the door, when she heard the soft tread of boots on the wooden floor. She turned, her guard already up, and found herself looking at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He held his hat in his hands and nodded politely. "Morning," he said. His voice was low and steady, without the brash loudness she had come to associate with most men who frequented the store. "I need supplies for my ranch. Got a list here if you do not mind." Josephine took the list without a word, her fingers careful not to brush his. She read through it quickly. Flour, salt, coffee, sugar, ammunition, rope, nails. Standard supplies for a working ranch. "This will take a few minutes to gather. I am in no hurry." She moved through the store with practiced efficiency, pulling items from shelves and setting them on the counter. Austin stood quietly near the window, looking out at the street. He did not try to make conversation, did not stare at her the way some men did, as if trying to solve a puzzle. When she had everything ready, he paid without haggling, tipped his hat, and left. "That was Austin Zimmerman," Margaret said, emerging from the back room. "He owns a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Good man, keeps to himself mostly, but he is always fair in his dealings." Josephine said nothing. She had heard similar praise before, usually right before someone proved themselves to be anything but fair. Austin came into the store every 2 weeks, always with a list, always polite. He never lingered longer than necessary, never asked personal questions. After 3 months, Josephine found herself relaxing slightly when he entered, though she remained wary. Trust was not something she could afford. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled high in the streets, and the wind cut through even the thickest coats. Josephine rented a small room above the saloon, the only lodging she could afford on her wages. It was drafty and cold, but it was hers, and no one could enter without her permission. She kept a knife under her pillow and slept with one ear always listening. On a particularly brutal day in January, when the temperature had dropped so low that water froze in its bucket within minutes, Austin came into the store looking more weathered than usual. Ice clung to his coat, and his cheeks were raw from the wind. "Rough day?" Margaret asked, her voice full of concern. "Lost 2 calves to the cold last night," Austin replied, setting his list on the counter. "Trying to keep the rest of the herd alive until this breaks." Josephine gathered his supplies in silence, but she found herself glancing at him more than usual. There was something in his face that spoke of genuine grief for those lost animals, a softness that seemed at odds with the hard life of ranching. "I am sorry about your calves," she heard herself say, the words surprising her as much as they seemed to surprise him. Austin looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since they had met. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and there was no calculation in them, no hidden agenda that she could detect. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It is part of the life, but it never gets easier." After he left, Margaret smiled at Josephine. "That is the most I have heard you say to any man since you arrived." Josephine felt her defenses slam back into place. "I was only being polite." "Of course," Margaret said, but her smile did not fade. Spring arrived slowly, the snow reluctant to release its grip on the land. As the weather warmed, Josephine noticed changes in the town. New families arrived, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. The saloon grew rowdier, and Josephine was grateful her room was at the far end of the building, away from most of the noise. One evening in April, as she was closing up the store, 3 men stumbled out of the saloon, drunk and looking for trouble. Josephine kept her head down and walked quickly, but one of them called out to her. "Hey there, pretty lady, where are you running off to?" She ignored him and walked faster. "I am talking to you." The man's voice grew angry, and she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart began to race, her hand moving to the knife she kept in her pocket. Before the man could reach her, a horse and rider appeared between them. Austin sat astride a large bay gelding, his expression calm but his posture radiating quiet warning. "The lady is not interested in conversation," Austin said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "I suggest you return to the saloon." The drunk man squinted up at Austin. "This is not your business, Zimmerman. I am making it my business. Go back inside." For a moment the tension stretched tight as a wire. Then the drunk man spat in the dirt and turned away, his companions following. Austin waited until they were gone before looking down at Josephine. "Are you all right?" he asked. She was trembling, though she tried to hide it. "I did not need your help." "I know," he said simply. "But I gave it anyway. Can I walk you to wherever you are staying? Just to make sure there is no more trouble." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to maintain her independence, to trust no one. But the street was dark, and those men were still nearby, and she was tired of being afraid. "I live above the saloon," she said finally, "at the far end." Austin dismounted and walked beside her, leading his horse. He kept a respectful distance, never reaching for her, never assuming any intimacy. When they reached the external stairs that led to her room, he stopped. "Thank you," Josephine said, the words coming with difficulty. "You are welcome. If those men bother you again, please let me know. Why would you care?" The question came out more harshly than she intended, born of years of disappointment and betrayal. Austin was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said finally. "No other reason required." He tipped his hat and led his horse away into the darkness, leaving Josephine standing at the bottom of the stairs, more confused than she had been in months. Over the following weeks, Josephine began to notice Austin more around town. He was always polite, always respectful, but he seemed to appear whenever she might need help, even in small ways. When she struggled with a heavy shipment at the store, he was there to lift the crates. When her horse, borrowed from Margaret for an errand, threw a shoe, Austin happened to be passing and helped her walk the animal to the blacksmith. "You do not need to keep helping me," she told him one day, her frustration evident. "I am perfectly capable of managing on my own." "I know you are," Austin replied, his tone mild. "I have seen how capable you are, but accepting help does not make you weak, Miss Parker. It just means you are human." "I cannot trust men," she said bluntly, the words ripping out of her like a confession. "I will not be fooled again." Austin nodded slowly, as if she had said something he expected. "That is your right," he said. "Trust has to be earned, and I understand that better than most. I am not asking for your trust, Miss Parker. I am just trying to be a decent neighbor." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the street with a tangle of emotions she could not name. Margaret confronted her that evening as they were closing the store. "That man is interested in you, Josephine. Anyone with eyes can see it." "Then he is wasting his time," Josephine said firmly. "I have made my position clear." "Have you asked yourself why you are so determined to push him away? Austin Zimmerman is not Gerald Morrison. He is not any of the men who have hurt you. How can you be sure?" Josephine's voice rose, pain lacing through her words. "How can anyone be sure? Men lie, Margaret. They pretend to be one thing and then reveal themselves to be monsters. I cannot take that risk again." Margaret's expression softened. "Not all men are monsters, dear girl. Some are just trying to do their best in a hard world. Austin has lived in this town for 5 years, and in all that time, I have never heard a single person speak ill of him. He works hard, he pays his debts, and he treats everyone with respect. That has to count for something." "It counts for nothing if it is all an act," Josephine said, but her voice lacked conviction. Summer brought intense heat that baked the earth and turned the grass brittle. The ranch work grew harder, and Austin came to town less frequently, usually only when he desperately needed supplies. He looked thinner each time Josephine saw him, his face drawn with exhaustion. In July, a prairie fire swept across the land east of Wheatland, destroying 2 farms and threatening the town itself. Every able-bodied person turned out to fight it, creating fire breaks and hauling water from the creek. Josephine found herself working alongside people she barely knew, all united in the desperate effort to save their homes. She saw Austin in the chaos, his face black with soot, directing men to where the flames burned hottest. He worked for 18 hours straight, never stopping, never complaining until the fire was finally contained. When it was over, he collapsed near the creek, too exhausted to even make it back to his ranch. Josephine, driven by an impulse she did not fully understand, brought him water and a blanket. He looked up at her through red-rimmed eyes and managed a weak smile. "Thank you," he rasped. "You saved the town," she said quietly. "We all did. You worked just as hard as anyone." She sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "Why do you do it? Risk everything like that?" Austin took a long drink of water before answering. "Because this is home. These people are my neighbors, my community. You do not turn your back on that when trouble comes." Most men would have saved their own property first. "My ranch was not in immediate danger," Others needed help more. He closed his eyes, his breathing starting to even out. That is just how it should be. Josephine watched him fall asleep there by the creek, vulnerable and utterly exhausted, and something inside her began to crack. Not break, not yet, but crack just enough to let in a sliver of light. The next day, Austin's horse was found wandering near town, but Austin was gone. Panic seized the community. People feared he had been injured in the fire, perhaps overcome by smoke and lost somewhere on the prairie. Search parties formed immediately. Josephine surprised herself by joining one. She rode out with Margaret's husband, Thomas, and 2 other men, scanning the scorched landscape for any sign of Austin. They found him 3 hours later, collapsed in a ravine about a mile from where he had fallen asleep. He had apparently tried to walk home but had been too disoriented from exhaustion and smoke inhalation. Austin! Josephine dismounted and scrambled down to where he lay. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Miss Parker." His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Being a decent neighbor," she said, repeating his words back to him. "Can you stand?" With help, they got him on a horse and back to town. The doctor examined him and declared that he needed rest, food, and clean air. His lungs were damaged from the smoke, and he would need weeks to recover fully. "He cannot go back to that ranch alone," the doctor said. "He needs someone to look after him, at least for a few days." Josephine heard herself say, "He can stay in the room behind the store. Margaret and I can check on him." Margaret looked at her in surprise but did not argue. They set up a cot in the storage room, made it as comfortable as possible, and installed Austin there over his weak protests. "I am fine," he insisted, though his voice said otherwise. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Josephine said firmly. "You nearly killed yourself saving this town. The least we can do is make sure you recover properly." Over the next week, Josephine found herself spending more time with Austin than she had spent with any man since Gerald. She brought him meals, changed his bandages, and sat with him when his coughing fits grew so bad he could not sleep. In the quiet hours they talked. Austin told her about his life, his words coming slowly at first, then with growing ease. He had come to Wyoming from Missouri 5 years earlier, after his parents died in a cholera outbreak. He had used his inheritance to buy a small ranch, determined to build something lasting, something good. He had no siblings, no close family. The ranch was his life, his purpose. "Do you ever get lonely?" Josephine asked one evening as the sun set outside the window. "Sometimes," Austin admitted, "but loneliness is better than being with the wrong person. I would rather be alone than compromise on what matters." "What matters to you?" He looked at her then, his dark eyes serious. "Honesty, integrity, kindness. I have seen too much cruelty in this world, Miss Parker. I want no part of it." Josephine felt something shift inside her, that crack widening just a bit more. "You can call me Josephine," she said quietly. "If you want to." A smile crossed his face, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Then you should call me Austin." "All right, Austin." The sound of his name on her lips felt strange and frightening and somehow right all at once. By the end of the second week, Austin was well enough to return to his ranch. Josephine helped him pack his few belongings, aware of a strange reluctance to see him go. He paused at the door, hat in hand. "Thank you, Josephine," he said, "for everything. I know it could not have been easy for you given your feelings about men." "You are different," she said, then caught herself. "That is, you have been nothing but respectful and kind. I appreciate that. I meant what I said before. I am not asking for your trust, but I hope we can be friends." "Friends," Josephine repeated, testing the word. "I think I can manage that." Austin's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That is more than I hoped for." After he left, the store felt emptier somehow. Margaret noticed Josephine glancing at the door more often, looking for a tall figure in dusty boots and a worn hat. "He has gotten under your skin," Margaret observed. "He has not," Josephine protested. "I am simply concerned for his recovery." "Of course you are, dear." August faded into September, and Austin returned to his regular visits to the store. But something had changed between them. Their conversations lasted longer, drifting beyond the merely transactional into discussions of books, of weather, of the small details that made up their daily lives. Josephine found herself looking forward to his visits, even as she tried to maintain her emotional distance. One afternoon, Austin lingered after making his purchases. "Josephine, would you consider coming out to the ranch sometime? I would like to show you what I have built there." "Only if you are comfortable, of course. Margaret and Thomas would be welcome to come along if you would prefer." Josephine hesitated. Going to his ranch felt like crossing a line, admitting to something she was not ready to admit. But curiosity tugged at her, and underneath her fear, there was a growing desire to see this place that Austin spoke of with such pride. "I will think about it," she said. "That is all I ask." A week later, Josephine found herself sitting beside Margaret in a wagon, Thomas driving, heading north toward Austin's ranch. Her stomach churned with nervousness, but she kept her expression calm. They crested a rise and the ranch spread out before them. It was not large, perhaps 300 acres of grazing land with a small house, a barn, and a series of corrals. But everything was well maintained, the fences straight, the buildings solid. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and chickens scratched in a yard near the house. It spoke of careful work, of someone who took pride in what they had created. Austin came out of the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on his pants. His face lit up when he saw them. "Welcome," he called. "I am glad you came." He gave them a tour of the property, pointing out improvements he had made, plans he had for the future. He spoke with passion about his cattle, about the land, about his hopes for expansion. Josephine watched him, seeing the man he was in this element, confident and capable. "You have done well here," she said as they stood near a fence, looking out over the grazing land. "Thank you. It has taken years of hard work and there is still so much to do, but it is mine, built with my own hands. No one can take that from me. Why did you invite me here?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "What do you want from me, Austin?" He turned to face her fully, his expression open and honest. "I invited you here because I wanted you to see who I am, truly. Not just the man who comes into the store every few weeks, but the whole picture. As for what I want from you, the answer is simple: nothing you are not willing to give. Your friendship is enough, Josephine, more than enough." "But you want more than friendship," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do not deny it." Austin was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "I would be lying if I said otherwise, but I am a patient man and I understand what you have been through. I will not push, I will not demand. If friendship is all you can offer, then I will take that and be grateful." "I do not know if I can ever trust again," Josephine said, the words painful to speak. "That man, Gerald, he destroyed something in me. I look at every man now and wonder what he is hiding, what lies behind the pleasant words." "I cannot change what he did to you," Austin said gently. "I cannot undo that damage. All I can do is show you day after day, year after year if necessary, that not all men are like him. Some of us mean what we say. Some of us keep our promises." Tears stung Josephine's eyes. "What if you are wrong? What if you waste years on me and I can never give you what you want? Then I will have spent those years living with integrity, treating someone I care about with respect and kindness. That is not a waste, Josephine. That is just being human." She turned away, unable to meet his eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she had kept locked away for so long. Austin did not reach for her, did not try to comfort her physically. He simply stood beside her, a steady presence, until she had regained her composure. On the ride back to town, Margaret reached over and squeezed Josephine's hand. "That man loves you," she said quietly. "I have known it for months." "Love is just a pretty word men use to get what they want," Josephine replied, but her conviction wavered. "Sometimes, yes, but sometimes it is real. Sometimes it is the truest thing in the world." Autumn arrived with brilliant colors painting the cottonwoods along the creek. Josephine continued her work at the store, and Austin continued his visits. But now, there was an unspoken understanding between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that existed even if they could not yet be fully acted upon. In October, word reached Wheatland that Gerald Morrison had been arrested in Colorado for attempted murder of another woman. The news hit Josephine like a physical blow. That could have been her, dead instead of wounded. She spent that night in her room, shaking, reliving the moment of the gunshot, the betrayal, the fear. A knock came at her door near midnight. She opened it cautiously, knife in hand, and found Austin standing there, his face etched with concern. "Margaret told me you heard the news," he said. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I am fine," Josephine said automatically. "You are not. Please let me sit with you." "Just sit, nothing more. You should not be alone tonight." Every defensive instinct told her to send him away, to maintain her walls. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of carrying her fear by herself. She stepped back and let him enter. Austin sat in the single chair near the window, while Josephine perched on the edge of her bed. They did not talk much. He simply stayed, a solid presence in the darkness, until exhaustion finally pulled her into sleep. When she woke in the gray light of dawn, he was still there, dozing in the chair, his long legs stretched out before him. She watched him sleep, this man who had spent the entire night in an uncomfortable chair, just to make sure she was not alone. Something inside her, something that had been frozen solid since that day she was shot, began to thaw. "Austin," she said softly. He woke immediately, alert despite the awkward sleeping position. "Are you all right? Why are you really doing this? Please be honest with me." Austin rubbed his face, then met her eyes. "Because I love you, Josephine. I have loved you since the first day I saw you in that store. So fierce and guarded and strong despite everything you had been through. I love your courage, your determination, your refusal to be broken by what happened to you. And I know you cannot love me back, not now, maybe not ever. But that does not change how I feel." Josephine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "How can you love someone who cannot trust you?" "Because trust and love are not the same thing. Love is a choice I make every day, regardless of what you feel or do not feel. Trust is something that grows slowly like a tree. You cannot force it, you cannot rush it. You can only tend it carefully and hope it takes root." "I want to trust you," she whispered. "I want to believe that you are who you seem to be, but I am so afraid." Austin stood and moved toward the door, respecting her space even in this moment of raw emotion. "Then be afraid," he said gently. "Feel whatever you need to feel. I will still be here, Josephine. Today, tomorrow, next year. However long it takes." After he left, Josephine sat in her room as the sun rose, illuminating the sparse space. She thought about Austin's words, about his patient presence in her life, about all the small ways he had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. And she thought about what Margaret had said. Not all men are monsters. Winter came again. Josephine's second in Wheatland. She was no longer the frightened, wounded woman who had stumbled into town. She had built a life here, earned respect through her hard work, established herself as a valued member of the community. But emotionally, she remained guarded, even as her feelings for Austin grew stronger with each passing month. They fell into a pattern, she and Austin. He came to town for supplies and they would talk, sometimes for hours. He never pressed her for more, never made demands. He simply existed in her life, constant as the seasons. One day in December, a traveling photographer came to Wheatland, offering to take portraits for a reasonable price. On impulse, Josephine had her photograph taken. When she picked up the finished portrait a week later, she studied it carefully. The woman in the image looked strong, capable, but there was a sadness in her eyes that no amount of careful posing could hide. She showed it to Austin during his next visit. He looked at it for a long time, then handed it back carefully. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "But I wish I could see you smile more." "Give me something to smile about," she said, the words coming out more challenging than she intended. Austin's expression grew serious. "I cannot give you happiness, Josephine. No one can give that to another person. It is something you have to find for yourself. But I can promise that I will never be the cause of your sadness, never add to the pain you have already endured. That I can promise." "How can you promise that? People hurt each other all the time, even when they do not mean to." "You are right. I cannot promise I will never make mistakes or say something clumsy or fail you in small ways. I am human, and I am flawed. But I can promise that I will never deliberately deceive you, never raise a hand to you, never betray your trust if you give it to me. I can promise to treat you with respect every day of my life. Those things I can control, and those things I promise." Josephine felt something settle inside her, some piece of a puzzle clicking into place. "I need more time," she said, "I know." Spring of 1880 brought floods that washed out roads and turned the prairie into a marsh. Supplies became difficult to get, and prices rose accordingly. Austin came to town less frequently, his visits dictated by necessity rather than social desire. Josephine found herself missing him, looking for his familiar form on the street, feeling disappointed when days passed without seeing him. Margaret noticed, of course. "You love him," she said one evening as they were closing the store. Josephine wanted to deny it, but the words would not come. Instead, she sank into a chair, her face in her hands. "I do not know what I feel anymore. I think about him constantly. I miss him when he is not here. But the thought of actually admitting my feelings, of making myself vulnerable, terrifies me." "Love is always a risk," Margaret said gently. "Always. But the question is not whether it is risky. The question is whether this man is worth the risk, and I think you already know the answer to that." In May, disaster struck. A sudden storm swept across the prairie, bringing hail the size of eggs. The damage was catastrophic. Crops were destroyed, livestock killed, buildings damaged. Austin's ranch was hit particularly hard. He lost a third of his herd and half his roof was torn off. When the news reached town, Josephine felt her heart seize with fear. She closed the store early and borrowed a horse, riding out to Austin's ranch with barely a thought for her own safety. The road was treacherous, still muddy from the floods, but she pushed forward. She found Austin in his barn, trying to shelter the surviving cattle. He was soaked to the skin, his face set in grim determination. When he saw her, shock registered in his eyes. "Josephine, what are you doing here? It is dangerous to be out in this weather. I heard what happened. I needed to see if you were all right." She dismounted, her skirts heavy with mud. "I am fine. The ranch took a beating, but I will recover. You should not have come out here. Do not tell me what I should or should not do." The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by fear and adrenaline. "I was worried about you, you stubborn man." Austin stared at her and something shifted in his expression. "You were worried about me?" "Yes, of course I was worried. When I heard about the storm damage, all I could think about was whether you were hurt, whether you needed help. I could not stay in town not knowing." Her voice broke. I could not just sit there. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and stood before her, rain dripping from his hair. Josephine, what are you saying? I am saying that I love you, you impossible man. I have been fighting it for so long, telling myself I could not trust you, building walls to keep you out. But you just kept being patient and kind and decent, and those walls started crumbling. I love you, Austin Zimmerman, and it terrifies me. For a moment, Austin simply stood there, drinking in her words as if they were water after a long drought. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached up and cupped her face in his hands. May I kiss you? Yes, Josephine whispered. His lips met hers, gentle and careful, a kiss that spoke of years of patience and longing finally rewarded. Josephine felt something break open inside her, all the fear and pain and guarded emotions rushing out, replaced by something warm and bright and hopeful. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. I love you so much, he said. I have loved you for so long. I know. I am sorry it took me so long to believe it. You have nothing to apologize for. You needed time and I had time to give. That is how love works, Josephine. Real love. It waits. It endures. It does not give up. They stood in the damaged barn, rain hammering on what remained of the roof, holding each other as if they could stop the world from spinning. For the first time in 2 years, Josephine felt safe in a man's arms. For the first time since Gerald's betrayal, she believed that trust was possible. The work of rebuilding Austin's ranch began immediately. The community rallied, as frontier communities did, bringing supplies and labor. Josephine was there every day, working alongside Austin, cooking for the volunteers, organizing the effort. People talked, of course. Word spread quickly that Josephine Parker and Austin Zimmerman were courting, and speculation ran wild about when there might be a wedding. Austin proposed in July, on a clear evening when the stars seemed close enough to touch. They sat together on the porch of his newly repaired house, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. Josephine Parker, he said, taking her hand, I know we have not been courting long by most standards. But I have loved you for 2 years, and you know me as well as anyone ever has. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Josephine looked at this man who had waited so patiently, who had proven himself in 1,000 small ways, who had never once pushed or demanded or tried to control her. She thought about the walls she had built around her heart and how he had not tried to tear them down but had simply stood outside, showing her every day that he was worth letting in. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I will marry you. They were wed in September of 1880 in the small church in Wheatland. Margaret stood up for Josephine and Thomas for Austin. The whole town turned out for the ceremony, curious to see the guarded young woman finally let someone into her heart. Josephine wore a simple dress of blue cotton, and Austin wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows, there was not a dry eye in the building. I promise to love you, to respect you, to never give you cause to doubt my word, Austin said, his voice firm and clear. I promise to trust you, to let you into my heart fully, to build a life with you, Josephine responded, tears streaming down her face. When they kissed as husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause. Margaret hugged Josephine tightly afterward, whispering, I am so proud of you, dear girl. You took the risk and look what you have gained. Moving to the ranch was an adjustment. Josephine had lived in town for 2 years, surrounded by people and activity. The ranch was quieter, more isolated, but it had a peace that she came to cherish. She threw herself into ranch life, learning to cook for a working ranch, to tend chickens, to manage the household accounts. Austin was patient with her learning process, never condescending, always willing to teach. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They had arguments, as all couples do, about money, about work, about the small irritations that come from learning to live with another person. But they worked through each conflict with honesty and respect, and Josephine found that trust, once given, could grow stronger with each test it survived. In the spring of 1881, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of joy and fear. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had not dared to think that far into the future during her years of guarded isolation. "Are you happy?" Austin asked, watching her face carefully when she told him. "I am terrified," Josephine admitted. "What if I am not a good mother? What if I am too damaged to raise a child properly?" Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You are the strongest, most capable woman I know. You survived betrayal and heartbreak, and you came out the other side. You will be a wonderful mother because you understand pain, and that understanding will make you compassionate. Our child will be lucky to have you." Their son was born in December of 1881, a healthy baby with dark hair like his father and gray eyes like his mother. They named him Samuel Thomas Zimmerman, and Josephine fell in love with him the moment she held him. Austin was a devoted father, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every small milestone. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Josephine confessed one night, watching Austin rock their son to sleep. "Which one of us are you talking about?" Austin teased gently. "Both of you. All of this. Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life, that I get to have this happiness after everything that happened." "You deserve this happiness," Austin said firmly. "You always did. You just needed time to believe it yourself." The years passed in a blur of work and love, and the everyday miracles of family life. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic child who loved the ranch and animals. In 1884, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor Margaret, after Austin's mother and Josephine's dear friend. The ranch prospered, slowly but steadily. Austin expanded the herd, bought more land, built a larger barn. Josephine sometimes thought about Gerald Morrison, rotting in a Colorado prison, and felt a distant sort of pity for him. He had thrown away his soul for nothing, while she had found everything worth having by learning to trust again. The scar on her shoulder remained, a permanent reminder of that terrible day, but it no longer controlled her. It was just a mark, a piece of her history, not the defining feature of her identity. Margaret and Thomas became like family, visiting often, doting on the children. Margaret, growing older now, her hair completely gray, often remarked on how much Josephine had changed. "When you first came to Wheatland, you were like a wounded animal, ready to bite anyone who came close," Margaret said one afternoon as they watched the children play. "Now look at you. Content, loved, trusting. It does my heart good to see it." "I had excellent teachers," Josephine replied, squeezing Margaret's hand. "You showed me that kindness still existed in the world, and Austin showed me that not all men are monsters. Between the two of you, you saved my life. You saved your own life, dear. We just gave you a safe place to do it." In 1886, Josephine gave birth to another son, whom they named Henry Austin. 3 children meant constant chaos on the ranch, but it was a happy chaos, filled with laughter and the sounds of small feet running across wooden floors. Austin thrived as a father, teaching his children about the land, about animals, about the values of hard work and integrity. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their children finally asleep after a long day, Austin took Josephine's hand. "Are you happy?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked so many times over the years. "Completely," Josephine said without hesitation. "I have everything I never dared to dream of having. A home, children, a husband I love and trust completely. Sometimes I think about that frightened woman who stumbled into Wheatland 8 years ago, and I barely recognize her." "She is still part of you," Austin said. "That strength, that determination, that refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. You have not lost those things. You have just added love and trust to them." "You waited so long for me," Josephine said, her voice thick with emotion. 2 years of patience, of proving yourself day after day. Most men would have given up. Most men would have missed out on the greatest blessing of their lives," Austin replied. "You were worth waiting for, Josephine. You were worth every moment of patience, every gesture of kindness, every act of respect. I would do it all again 1,000 times for this life we have built together." They sat together as darkness fell over the prairie. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built trust from the ashes of betrayal, who had created a love story in the harsh beauty of the Wyoming frontier. The years continued to roll by, marked by the seasons and the growing of their children. Samuel grew tall and serious, with his father's steady nature and his mother's fierce determination. Eleanor was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. Henry was the joyful one, quick to laugh, seeing adventure in everything. In 1889, tragedy struck when Thomas Sutton died suddenly of a heart attack. Margaret was devastated, and Josephine spent weeks helping her friend through the grief, understanding now what it meant to face the possibility of losing a beloved spouse. The experience made her hold Austin a little tighter, appreciate each day they had together a little more deeply. "I cannot imagine losing you," she told Austin one night, her voice trembling. "Watching Margaret's pain, I realized how completely my life is bound up with yours now. If something happened to you, I do not know how I would survive it." "You would survive," Austin said gently. "Because you are strong, and because our children would need you. But let us not borrow trouble from the future. We are here now together, and that is what matters." Margaret eventually recovered from her grief, finding solace in her friendship with Josephine and in doting on Josephine's children. She sold the general store in 1890 and moved into a small house near the ranch, wanting to be close to the family that had become her own. As the new decade began, Josephine looked back on the 12 years since she had arrived in Wheatland and marveled at the journey. She had come to this town broken and afraid, convinced that trust was impossible, that all men were dangerous. Austin had spent years proving her wrong, not with grand gestures or flowery words, but with consistent, patient, respectful action. Day by day, month by month, year by year, he had shown her that trust was possible, that love was real, that some promises were actually kept. Their children grew and thrived. Samuel, at 8 years old, was already helping with ranch work, learning the skills he would need to one day run the place himself. Eleanor, 6, spent hours reading every book she could get her hands on, dreaming of far-off places while loving her home. Henry, 4, was a whirlwind of energy who kept everyone laughing. In the fall of 1891, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. At 35, she was older than she had been with the other pregnancies, and the pregnancy was harder. But in the spring of 1892, she gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Rose Josephine. The baby was tiny but healthy, with a lusty cry that announced her determination to be heard. 4 children, Austin said in wonder, holding his youngest daughter with the same careful reverence he had shown with Samuel, his firstborn. "We have been blessed beyond measure." "We have," Josephine agreed, watching her husband with their daughter. "I never imagined this life was possible for me, never dared to hope for it. Looking back over the years, Josephine could trace the slow evolution of her trust. It had started with small things: Austin's consistent politeness, his respect for her boundaries, his willingness to help without expectation of reward. It had grown through his actions during the fire, his care for her when she needed support after hearing about Gerald's arrest, his patience as she worked through her fears. The turning point had been the storm, when fear for his safety had broken through her final defenses and forced her to admit what her heart had known for months. She loved him, and love required trust. From there, trust had grown like a tree, just as Austin had predicted. Their marriage had tested it, proven it, strengthened it until it was unshakable. Now, in 1892, 14 years after arriving in Wheatland, Josephine stood in the home she had built with Austin, surrounded by their children, and knew with absolute certainty that she had been right to take the risk. Austin had been worth the wait, worth the fear, worth the vulnerable act of letting someone into her carefully guarded heart. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s. Austin's careful management and hard work paid off in a thriving herd and productive land. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and plan for the future. Samuel showed clear aptitude for ranching, and Austin began teaching him more advanced skills, preparing him to eventually take over. Eleanor, as she grew older, expressed interest in becoming a teacher. Josephine encouraged this dream, seeing in her daughter the intelligence and compassion that would make her excellent at the profession. They arranged for Eleanor to have additional schooling, working with the local teacher to ensure she received the education she would need. Henry was still young, trying different interests, not yet settled on a path. Rose grew into a sweet-natured child who loved helping her mother around the house and playing with the barn cats. In 1895, Margaret Sutton passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. Her death hit Josephine hard. Margaret had been the first person to show her kindness in Wheatland, the woman who had given her a job and friendship when she had nothing. At Margaret's funeral, Josephine spoke about what Margaret's friendship had meant to her, how it had been a lifeline in the darkest period of her life. "She saw me when I was broken and afraid," Josephine said, her voice carrying across the churchyard, "and she offered me kindness without judgment, work without condescension, friendship without conditions. She taught me that goodness still existed in the world, and that lesson changed everything. I will miss her every day, but I will honor her memory by extending the same kindness to others that she showed to me." Austin held her hand throughout the service, a steady presence as always. That night, as they lay in bed, Josephine talked about the early days in Wheatland, how scared she had been, how certain that she would never find happiness again. "Margaret believed in you before you could believe in yourself," Austin said. "And she was right to believe. Look at the life you have built, the family you have raised. She would be so proud of you." "She would be proud of us," Josephine corrected. "This life was built by both of us together." The turn of the century brought changes to Wyoming and to Wheatland. The town grew larger, gained more amenities, became more civilized. The wildness of the frontier was fading, replaced by established communities and settled families. Samuel, now 18, was a full partner in running the ranch, a capable young man who had inherited the best qualities of both his parents. Eleanor, 16, had indeed pursued teaching and was working as an assistant to the schoolteacher in Wheatland, gaining experience while still living at home. Henry, 14, had discovered a talent for working with horses and was considering becoming a horse trainer. Rose, 8, was still determining her path, but showed artistic talent that Josephine encouraged. On their 20th wedding anniversary in September of 1900, Austin arranged a surprise for Josephine. He took her back to the spot where he had proposed, under the stars on a clear night, and presented her with a locket containing tiny photographs of their children. 20 years, he said, fastening the locket around her neck. 20 years of marriage, 22 years since I first saw you in that store. Every single day has been a gift. Josephine touched the locket, feeling the weight of it against her skin, a tangible reminder of the family they had created. When you first walked into the general store, I thought you were just another man, someone to be wary of and kept at a distance. I never imagined you would become my whole world. You did not make it easy, Austin said with a gentle smile. But the best things in life never are. You challenged me to prove myself, to be patient, to show you through my actions that I was worthy of your trust. That made me a better man, Josephine. Loving you has made me better in every way. I was so afraid, Josephine confessed, the words coming easily after so many years of trust. So convinced that opening my heart again would only lead to more pain. I am so grateful I was wrong. I am so grateful you were patient enough to prove me wrong. They stood together under the stars, just as they had 20 years earlier, two people who had found each other across the chasm of fear and betrayal, who had built a bridge of trust strong enough to last a lifetime. As the new century dawned, Josephine and Austin began to think about the future, about what would happen to the ranch when they were gone. Samuel was the obvious choice to inherit, but they wanted to ensure all their children were provided for. They consulted with a lawyer in Cheyenne, drawing up a will that divided assets fairly, ensuring Alina, Henry, and Rose would all receive their share. I want our children to know they are equally loved, Josephine said as they discussed the arrangements. Samuel will get the ranch because he loves it and will care for it, but the others should not feel cheated. They will not, Austin assured her. We have raised good children who love each other. They will work it out fairly among themselves when the time comes. In 1902, Samuel married a young woman named Catherine Wells, a farmer's daughter from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was a joyful affair, bringing together two families and celebrating the next generation. Watching Samuel recite his vows, Josephine was struck by how much he sounded like his father. Sincere, steady, committed. Catherine was a good match for him, practical and hardworking, with a gentle nature that balanced Samuel's seriousness. 2 years later, in 1904, Alina married a young man named Robert, a banker's son who had moved to Wheatland to open a law practice. They planned to settle in town, where Alina would continue teaching and Robert would build his career. Josephine loved seeing her daughter so happy, so confident in her choices, so unlike the frightened woman Josephine herself had once been. You have given your children something precious, Austin observed at Alina's wedding reception. You have shown them, especially your daughters, that women can be strong and capable while still opening themselves to love. That is no small gift. Henry left home in 1906 to work on a larger ranch near Casper, honing his skills with horses and learning from some of the best trainers in Wyoming. It was hard to see him go, but Josephine understood that children had to make their own way in the world. Rose, now 14, was the only one still at home, and she showed every sign of wanting to stay close, talking about opening an art studio in Wheatland someday. In 1908, Samuel and Catherine presented Austin and Josephine with their first grandchild, a boy they named Austin James after his grandfather and maternal grandfather. Holding her grandson for the first time, Josephine felt the circle complete. She had come to Wyoming broken and alone, and now she was surrounded by family, by love, by proof that trust and patience could build something lasting. You are thinking deep thoughts, Austin said, coming up beside her as she held baby Austin. I am thinking about circles, Josephine said. About how I came here with nothing, afraid of everything, and now I have all of this. About how Gerald Morrison tried to destroy me, but instead I found you, and you helped me rebuild myself into something stronger than I was before. About how pain and healing and love all connect in ways we cannot predict. Do you ever think about him? About what he did to you, sometimes, Josephine admitted, but not with anger anymore, not even with fear, mostly with gratitude, strange as that sounds. If he had not done what he did, I would never have come to Wheatland. I would never have met you. I would never have had this life. I would not choose to relive that pain, but I can acknowledge that it led me to something better than I ever could have imagined. Austin kissed her temple, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby in her arms. That is grace, he said. The ability to transform pain into something meaningful. You have always had it, Josephine, even when you did not realize it. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. Henry married and settled in Casper, though he visited often. Rose opened her art studio in Wheatland in 1912, creating beautiful paintings of prairie landscapes that sold to tourists passing through on the railroad. Austin and Josephine grew older together, their hair turning gray, their movements a bit slower, but their love undiminished by time. They still sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset, talking about their day, their children, their memories. In 1915, on a warm summer evening, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The ranch house overflowed with family, the sound of voices and laughter filling every room. Josephine looked around at all these people, all these lives that existed because she had taken the risk of trusting again, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Samuel stood to make a toast. To my parents, he said, raising his glass, who showed us all what real love looks like, who taught us that trust is earned through consistent action, that patience is a virtue, and that some promises really are kept forever. Thank you for everything you have given us, everything you have taught us. May you have many more years together. Many more years, everyone echoed, drinking to the toast. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Austin and Josephine sat alone on the porch, the house finally quiet. 35 years, Josephine said. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was that frightened woman in the store, trying to keep everyone at a distance. Other times it feels like a different lifetime entirely. It was a different lifetime, Austin said. You are not that woman anymore, and I am not the same man who spent 2 years trying to prove himself worthy of you. We have grown together, changed together, built a life that neither of us could have created alone. I love you, Josephine said, the words coming as easily now as breathing. I love you for your patience, for your kindness, for every single day you showed me that trust was possible. I love you for the family we have built, for the life we have lived, for everything you have given me. And I love you, Austin replied, taking her hand. For your strength, for your courage, for the way you refused to let what happened to you define you forever. For the mother you became, the grandmother you are, the partner you have been. I love you today exactly as much as I loved you 35 years ago, which is to say completely and without reservation. They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built a love story that would be told to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations to come. A story about patience and trust, about a woman who could not believe, and a man who spent years proving her wrong, about how the greatest love stories are not the ones that happen quickly, but the ones that are built slowly, carefully, with intention and respect and unwavering commitment. As they finally stood to go inside, Josephine paused and looked out over the ranch, the land they had worked together for so many years. She thought about the girl she had been, the woman she had become, the life she had never dared to dream of having. And she felt, rising in her chest like the sun over the prairie, a sense of peace and completion that could only come from a life well lived and a love well earned. "Come to bed," Austin said gently, holding out his hand. Josephine took it, as she had taken it 1,000 times before, and would take it 1,000 times again. Together, they walked into the house, into the life they had built, into the future they would continue to share for whatever years remained to them. The door closed softly behind them, and the prairie stretched out under the stars, silent and eternal, bearing witness to all the stories of courage and trust and love that had unfolded upon its endless expanse. End.